Today I want to go over some of the sanding basics that you need to know when refinishing your hardwood floors. Also, how to prevent from damaging your floors, which is a huge concern for a lot of people. The first thing that I want to go over is about the grit sequence. So when you're sanding and refinishing your floors, as most people know, you need to start with a very coarse grit, like a 36 grit, and then you use a very coarse grit to kind of clean the floor off, remove all the old finish, remove all the dents and scratches, and then once you've done that, you can climb up the grit sequences. So you go 36 to 50 to 80 to 100, and that way you finish with a very smooth, clean finish. But unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they want to skip. They want to skip from 36 grit all the way up to 100 grit because the floor looks clean, all the dents are out. Surely it can't take too much more work just to go over it with 100 grit and get it smooth. But unfortunately, this is what happens. So let's say this is a close-up of the surface of the floor and you've just sanded it with a 36 grit paper, and now it's got a very jagged surface. So it's generally flat and clean and all the dents are out now, but it's got a very coarse, rough surface because you've been over it with a 36 grit. Well, if you then go over it with 100 grit, you're going to take these peaks off like that. And you're going to leave these troughs in place. And let's say you go over with a 120, you're going to do the same again, and you're going to smooth off these high peaks and leave the troughs. Now obviously you don't want to do that. What you want to do is make life easy for yourself and do a 50 grit, 36 to 50, or maybe 40 to 60, and then you get a nice even scratch pattern with the next grit sequence, and then you go over it with an 80 grit, and once again you're reducing the coarseness of the surface and making sure that there's no scratches in the floor before you then move on to the finishing sanding. Now again, this is something that differentiates DIY floor sanders with professional floor sanders. So as you probably know, when it comes to sanding and refinishing your floors, you need a drum sander and an edge sander. Now, what you want to do to make it look really good, just like the professionals do, is use a finishing sander. And the big difference between these two sanders is with a belt slash drum sander. Let's say you've got a drum like this, it's like 8 inches wide, big drum with the abrasive on it. When it actually gets into contact with the floor, there's only about 1 inch of surface area in contact with the floor. And they make these machines to have roughly about 30 kilos worth of pressure on this, and it's spinning at maybe 3,000 RPM. So this is very aggressive, and it's made to remove material. It removes all the old finish and removes the surface of the wood, so you get down past the dents and the scratches into just a clean wooden surface, no old finish, nothing. And the same with the edge sander. So the edge sander is a disc that you use to get up close to the edge, to the baseboards. But again, you've got like a 6 or 7 inch disc like that, but the only bit that's in contact with the floor is about that. So again, this is spinning at 9,000 RPM. There's not as much weight or pressure on it in terms of weight, but it's spinning at 9,000 RPM, and it's a tiny surface area. So some people often say that this seems more powerful than the drum sander. It's just because it's got an even smaller surface area sanding the floor. So as you can imagine, it's these machines that people say you can damage your floor with, not so much the edger, but with the drum sander. And I am going to get to that in a minute and explain how you can easily avoid damaging your floors with a drum sander. But if you imagine these powerful machines with a very small surface area, they touch your floor for, let's say, half a second, and they're going to create an indentation. The aim of the game with these machines is to sand the floor in a way that keeps it nice and flat. So you go forward and you lift the drum, and you come back and you lift the drum, and with the edger you just keep moving. You don't stop on one spot because you're going to put a dent in the floor. But as I said, the main point of these machines, especially for professionals, is to get the floor clean and relatively flat so they can then go on to a finishing sander. So a finishing sander, such as the LACQUER Trio or the Bonner Flexi Sand, and there's also a square buff. There's quite a few different. I'm going to cover one or two of them. So the LACQUER Trio, which is what I use, it has 3 discs like this. Now each one of these discs is 8 inches, and the whole thing is in contact with the floor. So it's a huge surface area. So if you were to stand in the same place just for 5 minutes, it doesn't make that much difference. Even with the whole weight of the machine on them, which may be as much as 80 kilos, the surface area is so large that it's not aggressive, right? So each one of these discs are spinning, and then the whole thing spins. Right, and this is designed to polish the floor flat and get all of these scratch marks out, right, and just it converts it from a linear scratch mark system into an orbital / planetary scratch system. Now, because these are so much less aggressive than this, you need to get, with the drum sander and the edger, you need to go up to maybe about 100 grit and then drop down at least to about an 80 grit with this, just to make sure you're getting it perfectly clean and flat, and then work up to 100 and maybe 120 grit. Usually, if you're not staining it, 100 grit's enough, maybe 120 grit. And with the edger, so this should get within about 2 inches of the edge of the floor. And then there's other sanders like palm sanders, small orbital sanders that you can use to just smooth off the edge where the edge has been. So the drum sander and the edge sander are made for cleaning the floor off and getting it relatively flat for the machines that are actually going to make it look good, namely finishing sander, LACQUER Trio. Now, a lot of people are always asking whether you can sand and refinish your floors just with these sanders. But as I said, they're not very aggressive. So when it comes to actually trying to take the dents and scratches and unevenness out of your floor and the old finish, they're just not as good. And sometimes if you've got a fairly good conditioned floor, you can do it. However, there is one video on YouTube where a guy does it with a square buff. So it's a buffing machine. It's about that. It's about 12 inches this way and about 20 inches this way, something like that. And all it does is oscillate. It just kind of wobbles. Now, professionals use this just to do the very final sanding pass, just to give it a consistent scratch pattern all over the floor for staining. That's pretty much the only way they use this. It's just not that powerful. It doesn't do anything. So this guy in the video sands his floor, and what he doesn't show you, or what you can't see, and I suppose you can't see it in any videos, is just how much time he would have spent using that machine. He's actually sanding pitch pine, which is a very, very tough wood to sand. Now, when you see, there are a lot of videos where they're using these to sand their floors on the internet, you'll get a very rough, dirty floor, and they'll start sanding it, and straight away you can see clean floor. But if you actually look closely, you can see all the dents and scratches, and very often they never even get rid of them. They're just sanding the surface that's easy to get to, and it visually makes a very big difference. But to actually get down to remove all the dents and scratches, you're gonna need something a lot more powerful like a drum sander and an edge sander. So if professionals just could use these and these, we would. It would make our lives so much easier. We could carry and hold less tools. We wouldn't have the potential problems with the drum and edge sander. But the reason why we use them is because it gets the job done quicker and better for the job it does. So that's it for in terms of the grit sequence and trying to convince you to use a finishing sander. So the last thing that I wanted to say, in order to prevent your floor from getting badly damaged is that when you're using a drum sander, the problem is that people will put the drum down on the floor without moving forward first. So what you're supposed to do is you start moving forward and then you put the drum down, and then before you stop you lift it up. And then when you're coming back, you move back first and then you drop the drum down, and then you lift it up before you stop again. And again, this is something that everybody, well, a lot of people know, and you may have found it on the internet as well, but people still have problems. Well, the way I'm going to tell you to avoid having any problems with it is to practice doing that with a 120 grit. There's going to be a link to a video at the end of this video. I'm going to put it on this side here. And that will demonstrate again that movement with the drum. But if you put on a 120 grit, it's so ineffective that you're not going to do any damage to the floor. It's not just going to sand straight into the floor like it would with maybe a 36. You put on a 120 grit and you just keep doing it until you get used to it. I've done this with friends and I've taught them to sand a floor without any problems. Good. In fact, one person I taught him to do this in half an hour. He did all the sanding on this job I was doing, and we put the pictures on my website. It was perfectly fine. So put a 120 on, practice going down and up, and then down and then up again, and you should be fine. So if you do want to make sure that you want to do a perfect job on your floor, save a lot of time and money with the rental equipment, and get it looking like what the pros do, then I recommend that you go to my website, which is howtosandafloor.com, and especially pick up my video course, which is howtosandafloor.com/video course. The video course is it's over 2 hours worth of footage, about 20 different videos, where I sand a floor that I laid myself. It was a reclaimed floor, it was really rough, and I used the rental equipment. So you should learn everything you need to know there. If you did find this video very helpful, then please click like, click subscribe, which is here, and the video, as I was saying, that you can learn how to do the motion with the belt sander or drum sander, that's here, and my other sanding and refinishing videos are right here. Thanks a lot.